Hi, I'm Christy Matson and this is Megan Bracey, and we're just giving you some clarification and tips on signing into your quilt show section and your entries and what the different categories mean, some clarification. So when you first go and click the link and you go in, you will use the email address that you use for Member Planet that you put on your membership form, and then the password that is on the back of your membership card. Then that will sign in. If you've never signed in before, then it will ask you some other information, and that will create your account. And that will always be your username and password is the membership password and your email address that you use for the membership. So once you've signed in, then you're going to click on the button. There'll be two green buttons. One says add a new quilt and one says payment information. You would click on the add a new quilt, and then there will be a multi-step form which we're going to go through right now. This is what the sign-in screen will look like.
Okay, I'm going to give a little general information about entering for the quilt show. First of all, if you are entering through the entry form that Christy's talking about, it's any quilt that you're doing for the quilt show, but it does not include the show chairs challenge that Sue and Diana have included with the stockings. We're going to have a separate registration for that closer to the show. So if you are doing a stocking, there won't be any information on the order form about that. That's going to be separate. But if you're doing the President's Challenge that Cindy had for Oh, the Places You'll Go, that is a quilt and it's going to be part of this. So I just wanted to clarify that. Also, this video is to kind of help with frequently asked questions or things you might not know, but please, online is all of the rules about entering the show, and there's a lot of information we're not going to cover, so make sure you read through that document entirely, and it should answer any questions that we might not answer today. If you're not sure what you can enter, any quilt that you've never shown in an EIHQ show before. If you're a member of another guild, if you've showed it elsewhere, that's fine. If you've never showed a quilt, that's fine. It just can't have been in one of our shows. Otherwise, you can enter anything that you have. Do you have to have your quilt judged? You do not. We have two different ways to do that. You can enter a quilt just to be hung for the public to come and see, and that costs $5. You can enter a quilt to be judged by a certified quilt judge, and she gives feedback on your quilt, and that's how you could potentially be entered to win a ribbon in a category. You would have to pay to have your quilt judged. That costs $10. And if you're just not sure what to do, I encourage everyone to have one quilt judged. I think you get a lot of good feedback, so please consider doing that. We are going to go into detail about the categories, how to pick what categories are appropriate. We'll do that a little later. Yeah.
This is the form. It will show up in 3 screens. We'll discuss what each thing is in the next section. So when you first put in add a new quilt, the first thing it's going to ask for is your quilt name. And so give us the title that would be on your label on the back of your quilt. And then a description, and this is the place that you get to tell us anything special about your quilt, if you used hand-dyed fabrics, if you modified a pattern, anything like that that doesn't fit in the categories but you want us to know about your quilt. Then it's going to ask for your width and length in inches, and go for the widest point. If you have an unusually shaped quilt, go for the widest point width and lengthwise. And then the main color that you see in your quilt. The next thing it's going to ask you is your hanging preference, and that means if we had to limit the number of entries, is this your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, your fourth choice? Okay? And then it will ask your group size, which means, did you work on it alone? That would be solo. That means you pieced it and quilted it and bound it yourself. If you worked with a professional quilter, then you would be a duet. If a group of you work together, anything larger than 2 would be a group. Then it's going to ask you for your design source. So did you get it out of a magazine? Did you get it out of a book? A pattern? Was it your own original design, or do you have another source, maybe a YouTube video or whatever? Select the appropriate thing from the drop-down menu, and then it will ask you information about the title, the author, pattern name, when it's published, depending on which category you select there.
So the next part of the entry form will have categories that you can enter your quilt in, and they're all listed there. We are going to discuss the categories in depth in a few minutes, but right now they're just listed, each category that you can select. I want to draw your attention to how to deal with the President's Challenge. You will have marked whether the quilt you're entering is a President's Challenge or is not. You have 2 options here. You can select for category President's Challenge, non-judged, if you want to enter your President's Challenge and just have it seen at the show. If your President's Challenge is a quilt you want to have judged, then you have to select another category for it to be judged in. So if my President's Challenge is an art quilt, I could select art, landscape, and have that judged, and then it's still also a President's Challenge. Otherwise, you just select President's Challenge non-judged for the category. After the category, there's a number of menus about how you have put your quilt together, and on most of these you can select all the things that apply. So for piecing, you have a number of different options there, and you have to choose one of those. So if it's a traditionally made quilt and you've just pieced it on your machine, then you would select machine piecing. There's also English paper piecing, hand piecing, there's different options, and you can select the thing that is most relevant there. Then we talk about quilting style. So if it's hand quilted, there are a couple machine options. If you've machine quilted it on a domestic or any kind of sit down where you move the fabric, then that is a stationary machine quilting. If you've had a long armor do it, or you do your own long arming, then you can choose whether it is a hand guided machine quilting or a computerized machine quilting. Those are your options there. There's embroidery options for hand or machine embroidery. Seasonal, because our quilt show is quilts for all seasons, we may be grouping things for hanging in different seasons. So pick things that apply there. If it's a Christmas quilt or a wintry quilt or spring or Valentine's Day or whatever, go ahead and select, and you can select multiple of those. So if it's fall and Thanksgiving, you can select both of those, and that will help us hang them kind of in like categories for the seasonal things. And then there's some miscellaneous things to select at the bottom, just kind of other things you might have used that you want us to know if you used a panel, or if it's a miniature, or you've done yo-yos or something that's kind of unusual that wasn't covered elsewhere. If you have a miscellaneous thing and it's just nowhere on this form, it might be something you want to add to the description then, that we would then know something you've done that we don't have listed here. And these tags are going to help us subdivide the categories into like things, so giving us all the information is really important. All right, this year we have a few different categories, so we're going to go through those, but as a starting place, I just wanted to let you know we are working toward the goal of having each category have approximately 15 to 20 quilts. We're trying to make the category sizes as even as possible. So some categories, just by the nature of traditional large, are going to get bigger. We'll use some of those tags from the entry form, like machine quilted or paper pieced, some of the descriptions about how you've done it, to subdivide those categories further into separate small categories. So your quilt might be traditional large and then a solo or a duet. We're trying to keep the categories as even as possible, so it's important for us to have all the information about your quilt so that we can put like things together. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, Christy's gonna go ahead with quilts.
Okay, so let's talk about art quilts. An art quilt is a work that reflects innovative construction, design techniques, themes or subject matter. It often can be breaking the traditional rules of a quilt in terms of how it is constructed. There are three main categories. The first one is abstract, and an abstract composition, it does not have an identified subject. It might be focused on shape or flow or color or line. The next one is naturescape, which would be landscape, mountains, rivers, solar system, but whatever landscape you're choosing. And it can have animals and humans in it, but they aren't the main focus of the quilt. They're just part of the landscape. And then the last one is pictorial, which is also known as portrait. And that is something that has a recognizable image of a person or an animal or a object. And those are the three categories for our quilt.
Okay, then we'll talk about some of the special categories that we have listed. So the first one is clothing or accessories. This could include bags, clothing, pillows, dolls, mug rugs, kind of things that you've made that are maybe in a miscellaneous category, not necessarily a quilt, and they go there. The next category is modern. And modern quilts are kind of defined by asymmetry, minimalism, a lot of negative space. It can be very geometric quilting, straight line or grid quilting. It is not just a traditional quilt pattern made in very bold, bright colors. That's more of a contemporary quilt. So modern quilts certainly can have bright colors and fabrics, but it also, the pattern or the overall quilt needs to reflect a more modern feel than a traditional quilt pattern. If you're not sure if your quilt is modern or not, if you just do a Google search for modern quilts, you can get a good idea of kind of where that lies. There's a lot of good examples out there. The next special techniques category is a whole bunch of things grouped together that will get subdivided, I think, into further categories if we have enough people entering. So this is where if you've used kind of a specialized technique to put your quilt together, if you've done a lot of embroidery, hand or machine embroidery, if you use English paper piecing, foundation piecing, regular paper piecing, miniatures, there's a whole list of things there. What we're trying to do is not have so many quilts all together in the traditional category. So if you've used it, even if your quilt does look like a traditional quilt, but you've used some special techniques to construct it, put it in the special techniques category with the information about what you've used, so we can kind of divide these categories more evenly.
Okay. So on to traditional quilts. The first one is applique, and in this case we are looking for quilts that are primarily applique would fit in this category. It may be appliqued in a variety of ways, but applique must be sewn down, cannot just be fused on, and it can be any size. The next category is a new category for our quilt show, and that's quilt kits, including block of the month and row by row, where these are quilts that are made from a pattern given to you and fabric selected by somebody other than the quilter, and then put together in a quilt. And this can be any technique and any size, but the important thing is that the quilter did not choose the pattern or the fabric. The last one is that I'm going to talk about, and then Megan will talk about the rest, is juniors. And any quilter who is a member of the guild as a junior member and is under the age of 18 as of the date of the quilt show can qualify under this category. They must have constructed the quilt themselves. They can have adult direction, but the actual piecing must be done by the junior quilter. And quilting may be completed by someone other than the junior quilter, but then you would need to select the duet category for that.
Our next category is scrap quilts. It's also a new category. It has to incorporate at least 50 different fabrics in the quilt. So a scrap quilt made of all sorts of fabrics. It can be any technique that you've used. It can be any size. Seasonal quilts is also new this year, and those are Any quilts reflecting holidays or just a certain season, you can enter them here, your Christmas quilts or Halloween wall hangings or whatever, and you'll have given us more information on the entry form about what season, but the category would be a seasonal quilt. And then at the end, we have our traditional categories, traditional large and traditional small. The information is given there on the perimeter of the quilt. So to get the perimeter of your quilt, you add the width twice and the height twice to get all 4 sides added up of your quilt. It can be in the small or the large category. I know we always have a lot of quilts that fall in that category. So please do think if your quilt might work in any other category that you'd like to put it in before you put it there. But of course, we'll have a lot of quilts in that category, which is fine.
Okay, so you have 2 options when it comes to paying for your entries. You can pay online, and there's a button, you click payment information, and it will tell you how to pay by check or pay online. If you click pay online, it will calculate how much money will go onto your credit card. It does include the convenience fee that Square charges the Guild for using a credit card, but you are welcome to do that. If you choose to pay by check, you will write the check to the Guild, but you will mail it to me at the address listed so that, and send it as before the deadline for entry.
Okay, so to wrap up a little information, the dates of registration are March 20th through April 28th. That's kind of a little before our March meeting, and I believe 1 day after our April meeting. We will both be available between the March AM and PM meeting and the April AM and PM meeting to answer questions, or if you need some help registering online, we'll both have our computers with us and we can help do that. Or if you're just not sure about a category, we'll be available in those afternoon time slots. So stop by and talk to us with questions that you have about registering. If you have just kind of general questions, there is so much information on the website. Read through all the entry rules, and all the information about the quilt show is right there under the quilt show tab.
If you have questions about entering in general, then please contact me. My contact information is on the web page and on the handouts. And if you have specific questions about judging or categories, please contact Megan. Her information is also on the handout. Okay. Thank you.